Welcome to NTD Good Morning.
Here are today's top stories. An update on the tragic Brown University shooting. Police have released a man previously held as a person of interest.
Australian authorities are investigating the deadly shooting that killed 15 at a Hanukkah celebration in Sydney. The attack sending reverberations around the world amid rising anti-Semitism.
Police are investigating the deaths of director Rob Reiner and his wife at their LA home. What we know about the incident so far.
President Trump warns of, quote, very serious retaliation after an ISIS terrorist killed 2 U.S. Army soldiers and an American interpreter in Syria.
Ukrainian President Zelenskyy says Ukraine is willing to drop its NATO bid in exchange for security guarantees. Zelenskyy calls the decision a compromise.
And shoppers in London are getting ready to stuff their stockings with unique Christmas gifts. We take a closer look at some handcrafted items from artisans and entrepreneurs.
This is NTD Good Morning, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here are Stephanie Cox and Carrie Dunst.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Today is Monday, December 15th. You're watching NTD Good Morning. In today's top news, an update on the tragic shooting at Brown University. Police have released a man held as a person of interest in the incident that left 2 students dead and 9 injured.
NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on the investigation and reactions from President Trump and others.
Police in Providence said yesterday that a man in his 20s was taken into custody in connection with Saturday's shooting. At a late-night news conference hours later, Providence Mayor Brett Smiley said the man would be released.
We know that this is likely to cause fresh anxiety for our community.
Smiley says the investigation was going in a different direction and that he doesn't believe the community is at risk.
And so the status of safety in our community remains unchanged. And we believe that you remain safe in our community.
Certainly there was some degree of evidence that pointed to this individual, but that evidence needed to be corroborated and confirmed.
Police say they got a tip and the FBI followed through with it, and they ended up locating the individual of interest who was eventually released. FBI Director Kash Patel yesterday said the agency activated the FBI's Cellular Analysis Survey team to provide critical geolocation capabilities. Authorities say 7 of the injured are in stable condition, 1 is recovering but still in critical condition, and 1 has been discharged from the hospital. First fatality in the shooting has been named as Ella Cook, a sophomore who served as vice president of the campus College Republicans. Her identity was confirmed by her parish in Alabama and by a former classmate. Crowds gathered at a Providence park yesterday evening to honor the victims.
I always felt that Brown is such a safe place, and Providence as well, and so it really kind of hits home. We're all very sad and coming out of a period of being very scared.
President Trump paid his respects to the victims.
Unfortunately, 2 are no longer with us. Brown University, 9 injured, and 2 are looking down on us right now from heaven.
Trump called Brown one of the greatest schools anywhere in the world.
Things can happen, so to the 9 injured, get well fast, and to the families of those 2 that are no longer with us, I pay my deepest regards and respects from the United States of America.
The attack set off hours of chaos across the Ivy League campus and surrounding Providence neighborhoods as hundreds of officers searched for the shooter and urged students and staff to shelter in place. Brown University has canceled exams and classes for the rest of the year. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Our thoughts are certainly with all those impacted, and we will be keeping you updated. Next, the Providence City Council is directing people with any information related to Saturday's shooting at Brown University to share it with the FBI.
That includes any tips, videos, photos, anything that as authorities continue their investigation. The tips can be sent to fbi.gov/Brown University shooting.
And the deadly attack on a Hanukkah celebration in Australia. It's highlighting growing concerns about anti-Semitism around the world.
The shooting on Bondi Beach in Sydney left 15 dead and dozens injured. Here's what we know so far, and a warning: this following footage might be disturbing for some viewers.
Flags fly at half-mast across Sydney as Australia mourns the victims of a shooting at Bondi Beach. 15 people were killed. Police locked down the area after 2 gunmen opened fire Sunday during a Hanukkah celebration on the beach. Witnesses described the chaos that followed.
So a few of us went out there, and just people were just running up the street here. And then someone goes, "There's a shooter," and then we started hearing shots.
Among the dead, a 10-year-old girl and a prominent rabbi who helped organize the event. Authorities say about 1,000 people were gathered when the shooting began. Police say investigations also recovered unexploded devices near the scene. The attack followed months of rising anti-Semitic incidents across the country, though police have not linked those cases to the shooting.
Last night I was talking to my own 12-year-old daughter, who every year since she was born was with me at this event. And but for the grace of God, she would have been there and I would have been there. And I have to tell her whether she should be terrified. And this time I can't tell her not to be terrified.
Police shot and killed one of the suspected gunmen at the scene and took the second suspect to the hospital. Authorities later confirmed the suspects were father and son. As of today, 27 injured victims were still being treated in hospitals across New South Wales. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese visited the scene Monday, laying flowers and paying tribute to the victims. As the attack unfolded, a bystander stepped in, disarming one of the gunmen in a moment now seen around the world. The man, Ahmed Al-Ahmed, was shot during the attack. His cousin describes him as a hero.
We hope he will be fine. He's a hero, 100%. He's a hero because what we see on the social media, he's 100% hero.
Video shows Ahmed crouching behind a car before rushing the gunman and wrestling the weapon away. The Premier of New South Wales on Sunday praised Ahmed's actions.
I think it's the most unbelievable scene I've ever seen. A man walking up to a gunman who had fired on the community and single-handedly disarming him, putting his own life at risk to save the lives of countless other people. That man is a genuine hero, and I've got no doubt that there are many, many people alive tonight as a result of his bravery.
In Washington, D.C. on Sunday, organizers opened the national menorah lighting with a solemn tribute to the victims of the Bondi Beach attack. Rabbi Levi Shemtov urged the crowd to respond by openly practicing their faith, despite fear and grief.
Echoing in my mind were the words that were said by Rabbi Eli Schlanger. He said, "We have one response. Be more Jewish. Feel more Jewish. Look more Jewish."
At the White House, President Trump addressed the attack during a Christmas message.
We're here to celebrate Christmas and to celebrate, and I think today we can very say loudly, we celebrate Hanukkah, because that was such a horrible attack. That was a purely anti-Semitic attack.
Across the U.S., police departments have increased security around Hanukkah events.
I'm going to be blunt. This is not an isolated incident. It is part of a wider assault on Jewish life, an environment in which hatred far exceeds rhetoric and erupts into horrifying acts of violence.
Back in Australia, investigators continue working to understand the motives behind an attack that has shaken the country and communities worldwide.
Australian leaders are now moving toward tighter gun oversight after investigators confirmed one of the Bondi Beach suspects legally held a firearms license for about 10 years and owned 6 registered weapons. A combined meeting of the country's state and territory leaders with the Prime Minister has agreed to reform Australia's firearms system. It will include a national gun register and tighter controls on gun ownership and emerging weapons technology.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says gun licenses must be reviewed over time, warning that people's circumstances can change and radicalization may go undetected. New South Wales Premier Chris Minns says he will not hesitate to change the law if gaps are identified, adding that the investigation is still in its very early stages.
And Israel is sending 2 volunteers to Sydney to help out in the aftermath of the Bondi attack.
The Israeli search and rescue organization Zaka has volunteers from Israel, South Africa, and Melbourne working together to assist local authorities.
A Jew is a Jew is a Jew, no matter where he is, whether in Israel or abroad. There is nothing like assistance from Israel, especially in such attacks we are experienced in.
I think that the situation right now around the world is very difficult, and I think that now being Hanukkah, I think we need to bring in the light to lighten up the world.
Back in Israel, residents gathered for a vigil yesterday in Tel Aviv to commemorate the victims.
Israel's parliament building in Jerusalem was lit up with the colors of the Australian flag.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said yesterday that Australia's recent recognition of a Palestinian state encourages terrorism.
Netanyahu referred to a letter he had said that he sent to Australia's Prime Minister 4 months ago. He said he told Anthony Albanese that he is legitimizing rioters and not lifting a finger to, quote, eliminate these centers of terror. And joining us now with reactions to the tragic shootings at both Brown University and Bondi Beach in Sydney is Mike Leon. He's the host of the podcast, Can We Please Talk? Also with us is Republican strategist Angie Wong. Angie, Mike, thank you both very much for joining us on this somber morning. Mike, first, let's discuss the attack on Brown's campus. The suspect is still at large after a person of interest was released back to the public. Any update on the latest, and do we know more about the suspect that they're looking for? Any information or any descriptions of any sort?
Yeah, well, good morning, everybody, first and foremost. You know, I have experience in some of this. My cousin goes to Florida State University, and the shooting that happened earlier this year, she happened to be in that, she was supposed to be in that classroom, excuse me. Thankfully, she overslept that class. So I feel for everybody involved in all of this and trying to contact loved ones and seeing the video that the student put up yesterday of the police, you know, coming in and stuff like that. So I feel for everybody up there. I have a economics professor up there, Mark Blythe, who was recently on the show from Brown University, who I contacted in the aftermath of this. You know, Brown University has limitations on some of their cameras in some of their buildings. So there's a little bit of a back and forth there between not only the campus police and obviously Rhode Island police and what they have information wise. And like you said, Carrie, the suspect of interest was found due to the geolocation trackers and things like that. He was released recently. So I don't know where this investigation will end up turning up, but as of right now, obviously, like you said before, any tips that people have up there, you know, call them in and things like that. But it's a sad situation, especially when you see a campus being locked down just on an average. We're about to start into the holidays. Hanukkah's already starting and things like that. And I know we'll get into that. And to see something like this happen, especially on, you know, one of the most known universities in this country, an Ivy League school and things like that, like it's very sad to see. It's a sad situation.
Yeah, agreed, of course. And Angie, the school is no longer under a lockdown situation, but at this point, the suspect is still at large and on the loose. What are your initial reactions to the current state of what's happening at Brown?
Yeah, I know these are critical hours for detectives to find this shooter. I'm actually quite surprised at a university like Brown University, where they have over 800 security cameras around the campus, that we get a really grainy shot of someone walking away with a black hoodie on. It is a very strange thing that there is no license plate readers and that doors were able to be opened by someone who may or may not have been a student. All of this is really stumping investigators. And they're even combing through social media accounts to see if there's anything that was put online that would have brought on a shooter like this. And we've seen in previous school shootings, those are some of the indicators. None of that is the case here. And it seems as though they don't really have a place to go. You listen to what the investigators say at the press releases, and they can't, and you can see from the words and tell from the words that they don't really have a lead. So this is what's really worrying. My questions are, was this a targeted attack at the victims? One of them, we're learning, was the VP of the Republican Club at Brown University. Was this a targeted attack towards Jewish students, which some reports are claiming, given the timing that yesterday was the first day of Hanukkah? So it was one of those, you know, there's a lot of these kind of political killings that we're seeing. Is that what this is? And I'm wondering if that is why it's taking so long to get information out to the public.
Yeah, and that is a good segue to the situation in Bondi. Mike, clearly there's no mystery here, very much an anti-Semitic attack. One of the killers of the father and son died in the exchange of fire, but what do we know so far about the two suspects?
Yeah, and kind of what you said to piggyback on that, we're seeing lockdowns, or not lockdowns, at least more increased police presence. I was at a Jewish center here yesterday for a performance for my daughter, and you're seeing a bigger police presence in the U.S. But in terms of what happened in Bondi Beach, again, we know that this was racially motivated, religion motivated in terms of this Jewish community. Like you said, father and son, registered gun owner for years. They had potentially ISIS flags, according to authorities there, in their vehicles. So this was something that was a targeted attack. Kudos to that man who hid behind the cars and risked his life to save potentially more folks that would have been injured in this attack. And it just goes to show, what we were talking about before and what President Trump said earlier. This is the first night of Hanukkah yesterday, and we're going to have potentially attacks like this on the Jewish community. It's abhorrent. It's disgusting. I know one thing that I heard that you mentioned earlier, or Steph may have mentioned it, about that Australian leaders are meeting to figure out gun laws and a national gun registry at that level. I'd love if the U.S. would have that. I mean, we can talk about whether or not that would actually stop some of these things, but be it as it may, people's ideology does change over time, right, Carrie? And that's what we're kind of seeing. This man was there for 10 years and owned these weapons, and then all of a sudden one day decides to do this because of whatever factors as the investigation comes out. So we'll see how that all plays out. The son's in critical condition as of now, but my thoughts and prayers, and I know that that statement is overused at times, but my thoughts and prayers truly to everybody affected out there in Bondi Beach.
You make a very interesting point. As ideology changes over time, radicalization can happen quickly, and then there's the balance of privacy versus being able to comb through the big data and find these signals. Angie, I want to shift to Anthony Albanese. He described the attack as an act of pure evil and an act of terror and an act of anti-Semitism. And U.S. cities, as Mike pointed out, are now tightening all the security around anything Jewish related. And we saw the clip of the rabbi saying the answer is not to hide your Jewishness, but to be even more representative of your faith. What are your thoughts with all of these various subfactors that led into what we're now trying to understand?
Well, it was only a few short months ago that Albanese and Foreign Minister Wong of Australia, where they were pushing for the support of the Palestinian state, right? A lot of this is being fueled. A lot of anti-Semitism is running through its course in Australia. Why? Because they want to please the Muslim voters there, the newly arrivals of Muslim voters. And they will say and pivot to any sort of message they need to in order to reach those voters. So it's really fresh now to see him to say, well, be more Jewish. Well, I don't know if that's really the answer here, because he's getting attacked from both sides. Clearly, there was some anti-Semitism involved in this as the investigation unfolds. We're going to learn more and more, but the early points of this investigation definitely shows that. So you can't have these kind of political rhetoric running through the prime minister and the foreign minister, and at the same time, backtrack and say, oh, well, you have to do this as well. It's confusing. It's not great for the country. Australia has some of the toughest gun laws out there, so this is certainly not a gun control issue. You can see from the videos of the shooter, it was military-style shooting. They knew what they were doing with those rifles, where the hero that stopped the attack of one of the shooters, you can tell he didn't know how to clear the chamber of that rifle. He was just pulling the trigger. He didn't know how to use a gun because there are very little civilian guns in Australia. That's what's happening here. And, I'm definitely a Second Amendment girl. And to see that happening in Australia, I do not ever want to see that here. I think we all need to be gun trained.
Well, I know that on this issue of gun control, you guys represent two different perspectives on that, but I think we both can agree on the bravery of Ahmad al-Ahmad. Interestingly, an Arab man who saved the lives of countless Jews that day. So if there's one grain of light on this Hanukkah massacre, it is that. And we appreciate you both for joining us. Mike Leon, Angie Wong, thank you.
Thank you
guys.
Meanwhile, Hollywood actor and director Rob Reiner, along with his wife Michelle, were found dead in their Los Angeles home yesterday.
Police say no suspects have been identified and homicide detectives are involved in the investigation. They offered little information yesterday, saying details would be issued by the LA County Coroner's Office.
At this time, the Los Angeles Police Department is not seeking anyone as a suspect or as a person of interest or in any other manner, and we will not be doing that until we conduct our investigation and we move forward. In terms of someone that may have information regarding what happened inside the residence, we're not going to release that information. That'll be part of the investigation.
LAPD Deputy Chief Alan Hamilton told reporters patrol officers called to the home discovered 2 bodies inside the residence. Reiner made his directorial debut in 1984 with the music mockumentary This Is Spinal Tap. He went on to direct films like Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, and A Few Good Men. He also co-starred in the 1970s hit television comedy All in the Family.
His wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, had an accomplished career as a photographer. She's known for taking the photograph of President Trump that appeared on the original cover of his book, The Art of the Deal. She also worked as a producer on several films.
Now to the ISIS attack over the weekend in Syria. An Iowa police chief has confirmed that his son, Nate Howard, was one of the 2 American soldiers killed in the ambush.
The shooter was killed and 5 people suspected to have connection to the gunman were arrested. President Trump is warning of very serious retaliation. NTD's Melina Weisskopf brings us more.
A deadly ISIS ambush in Syria killed 2 troops from the Iowa National Guard. In a Sunday post, an Iowa police chief revealed that his son, Nate Howard, is one of the victims. The other victims' names are expected to be released later today. Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds said she's spoken to the victims' families.
I ask that all Iowans stand united in supporting them and lifting them up in prayer during this incredibly difficult time.
During a Christmas reception on Sunday, President Trump mentioned the terrorist attack several times, paying respects to the families and vowing to have justice.
The families of those 2 that are no longer with us, I pay my deepest regards and respects from the United States of America. Thank you very much. It's a very important thing to say. And we mean it. I can tell you in Syria, there will be a lot of damage done to the people that did it. They got the individual person, but there'll be big damage done.
The retaliation is expected to be a broader target of ISIS. Partner forces killed the gunman, and 5 with suspected ties have since been arrested. Lawmakers are encouraging the continued cooperation to totally dismantle ISIS.
Trump rooted out and took out the ISIS caliphate in his first term without starting another forever war. He's going to do that again.
The ISIS is still the most capable and the most dangerous Islamic terrorist group who have already demonstrated that their intent is to strike even within the United States.
Congressman Mike Turner noted that around 2,000 American soldiers are still in the country. President Trump emphasizes that Syria's president was devastated by the news, and Syria will keep fighting alongside U.S. troops. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
A potential terror attack in Germany averted. Authorities say they arrested 5 men over the weekend suspected of being radical Islamists planning an attack on a Christmas market in Bavaria. The suspects include nationals from Morocco, Egypt, and Syria. According to the statement, they were detained on Friday at the border crossing between Germany and Austria. Investigators believed the men intended to drive a vehicle into a crowded market area with the aim of killing or injuring as many people as possible. Authorities also suspect an Islamist motive behind the planned attack. This follows a series of attacks in Germany. Last December, several people were killed by an attack in Magdeburg. Chile shifts to the right after a runoff election. Conservative candidate Jose Antonio Cast has been elected president following a resounding victory against a Communist Party candidate. Cast is a member of the Republican Party of Chile. He won more than 58% of the vote. Communist Janet Jara won 41%. It sets the stage for Chile's most conservative government in decades. Secretary of State Marco Rubio congratulated Cast on the victory. Rubio says he's confident Chile will advance shared priorities, including strengthening public security and ending illegal immigration. Many of Cast's campaign promises resemble those made by President Trump on the campaign trail. Cast promised to crack down on crime, the deportations of hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants, and economic restoration. And pro-democracy campaigner Jimmy Lai has been found guilty in a Hong Kong court. Rights groups say the case shows how the Chinese regime's national security law is being used to silence critics. Lai now faces a possible life sentence. Here are the details.
Hong Kong's High Court on Monday found pro-democracy activist and media boss Jimmy Lai guilty of working with foreign forces to harm national security. It also found a 78-year-old guilty of conspiracy to publish seditious material. These charges come from a tough national security law put in place by China and could leave him facing life in prison. The case has drawn international scrutiny of Hong Kong's judicial independence amid a years-long crackdown on rights and freedoms. Lai had pleaded not guilty to all charges. He started the now-closed Apple Daily newspaper and has been one of the strongest critics of China's Communist Party leadership. Lai has faced many legal cases, including those under the sweeping security law that China brought in after the pro-democracy protests in 2019. He has already spent 5 years in jail pending the outcome of his case and will be sentenced at a later date. Lai's lawyer, Stephen Kwan, said any decision on an appeal would come after the sentencing. A pre-sentencing hearing where Lai can plead for lenience is scheduled for early next year. The verdict caps a year that saw Hong Kong's pro-democracy camp virtually vanish. On Sunday, the city's last major opposition group, the Democratic Party, voted to disband under pressure from Beijing.
And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says Ukraine is open to dropping its NATO bid in return for Western security guarantees to end the war with Russia.
Zelenskyy's comments came ahead of his meeting in Berlin with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, on Sunday.
Ukrainian conditions from the very beginning, or maybe not conditions, but more correctly, Ukraine's desire, was to join NATO. And these were real security guarantees. Some partners from the United States of America and Europe did not support this direction. I believe that for today, the fair possible option should be we stand where we stand. And this is true, because this is what a ceasefire is. The parties stand, and then diplomatically try to resolve all common issues.
Zelenskyy also said that the U.S. and European security guarantees instead of NATO membership was a compromise on Ukraine's side.
The move marks a major shift for Ukraine, which has fought to join the NATO military alliance as a safeguard against Russian attacks.
Security measures in Berlin were high today as ceasefire negotiations between Ukraine and U.S. representatives are set to continue.
Zelenskyy and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz will be speaking to the press in the afternoon.
We'll be keeping you updated, but as the fighting continues, efforts to end the Russia-Ukraine war do too. The losses on the ground and the individual stories that make up the bigger picture often go untold.
That's right, and we're pleased to welcome today two of the foremost voices speaking out about the experiences of Ukrainians. We have Ukraine Freedom Project founder Stephen Moore and the NGO's Chief Operating Officer Anna Shvetsova. Thank you both so much for joining us today. And you've just finished a new film, A Faith Under Siege. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, Faith Under Siege tells the stories of Ukrainian Christians who have dealt with the worst that Vladimir Putin has had to give them, yet overcome through faith. It's terrible and yet so inspiring as well. You know, Russia has shut down every church in occupied Ukraine that's not controlled by the Kremlin. There's some 70 pastors and priests who have been murdered by the Kremlin. And the unfortunate thing is the Russian Orthodox Church is complicit in this. And it is about as bad as it can be for Christians.
And faith is something certainly that many folks in the U.S. share with those in Ukraine, many Catholics, many Protestants over there in Ukraine. What do you think is something that Americans are largely missing out on based on your experience of what's happening in Ukraine? Anna.
Ukrainians are mainly Christian nations. We are 80% Christians, and we are like the main religion is Orthodox, then Catholics, and the Protestants are the third largest denomination in Ukraine. What the story which is not getting out is that Russians are targeting Protestants disproportionately. When we were making the movie last year, in autumn last year, out of 46, back then there were 46 faith leaders killed by the Russians. 22 of them are Protestants. although they are only 4% of the population. So they're targeting them disproportionately. They consider them to be an American religion. When Russians are coming to occupy a city, they see a pastor, and it's a Protestant pastor. They think, oh, you are Protestant, or you're evangelical. It's an American religion. You must be an agent of CIA, just like our priests are agents of the Kremlin, because Russian Orthodox Church is a working arm of the Kremlin.
Yeah, this is absolutely devastating and shocking to hear. You would think in a conflict, the military and military installations would be the targets, but we've seen, of course, civilian communities being targeted. But I think little is known about what you're describing, that actually men and women of peace and of faith and of religious leadership are disproportionately being targeted by Putin and Moscow. I want to shift to the Ukraine Freedom Project, and it works at this intersection of faith, freedom, and response. Can you share a little bit more about that, please?
Sure. I've worked in Republican politics all my life. I was the chief of staff to a member of Congress for about 7 years, and I went over to Ukraine on day 5 of the war because I wanted to help. You know, I just showed up, got to the border. The line to get into Ukraine was a lot shorter than the line to get out. And I went in there just because I have some Ukrainian friends. I wanted to help them be safe. And then there's just so much going on there, particularly in the information war. We're in an information war, a global information war. And the stuff coming out of Ukraine is not accurate. I'm looking on the ground, I'm looking around, I'm like, I'm watching certain conservative influencers and I'm looking around like, that's not what I'm seeing, And so I just took it upon, it was kind of a burden for me. God gave me a burden to tell the truth to Americans, to American Christians, American conservatives.
And what worries you most if this kind of fatigue around the coverage of Ukraine and misinformation, as you put it, continues?
Well, a lot of people think this is about Ukraine, and it's not. We are in a global war. China is backing all this, right? They're bankrolling it. Just last week, a Chinese drone company took a stake in a Russian drone company. And those Shahed drones that you always hear about going through Ukraine, those are made by the Iranians. And so, all our enemies are working together. They're collaborating, they're conspiring against us. And, America's scrolling Instagram.
Anna, your thoughts on that?
There are a lot of conversations about peace deal, about will Ukraine give up the land, will it not give up the land? Well, it's not about the land. When we are speaking about peace deal, there are 3.5 million people who are living now under the occupation. 2.5 million to 3 million of them are Christians who cannot go to church on Sunday, who worship God under the threat of being sent to prison for 20 years. We should remember about people and what do we do with them, and to remember to include, when we are drafting any peace deal, include religious freedom as one of the requirements from the Russia. These people need to serve, to practice their religion freely.
And after everything that you've seen and continue to observe there on the ground, what's giving you genuine hope for the continuation of faith and culture there in Ukraine?
When you see all the stories of the people who overcome the worst things, my role of making the movie was to find people who endured the worst, who were tortured by the Russians, who were interrogated, who were thrown away from their homes, and convince them to talk on camera about the worst things, whatever happened to them. My strengths got stronger because I was hearing how they overcame this amazing, amazingly bad things through faith.
Yeah, I think when you hear these stories of people who, when pushed up against a wall, their faith really is the thing that separates the path forward for them. Maybe you could share a little bit more of some of the anecdotes that people could expect to see in the film, as well as where they can see the film.
Here we have, and I'll actually tell you a real brief update. There's a guy named Sergei Hardarzi, and Sergei was just sleeping in his home, And he's a very devout man of faith. And you hear people that are Christ-like. This guy is like the most Christ-like person I've ever met, because his apartment was hit by an Iranian drone, and his wife and his infant son were killed. He and his 4-year-old daughter survived. And so he actually then 3 weeks after that, he went to Washington, D.C. to tell Speaker Johnson about what happened to him and what's happening to Christians in Ukraine. I mean, I'd be a mess, right? And then just last week, tragically, the Russians hit him again with a drone. And he's married again, and he's got his daughter, and again, the Russians are targeting Christians, and it's statistically improbable that they did not know he was there. Right? He's a hero of our movie. Our movie is making a real difference. A Faith Under Siege. People are seeing it. It's on. They can go to faithundersiege.com and see Sergei Haidarzi and understand the amazing just strength, courage, and faith he displays.
And having started this organization, created this powerful film, you're a veteran, you've worked in government. With all of your experience, what do you hope government here might do as next steps to contribute to the war?
Yeah, well, we're operating. Yeah, sure. We're operating on a lot of premises that are just not accurate. Like, Putin wants peace. Not accurate. He's been in. He's actually broken already 25 peace agreements with Ukraine. And there's nothing to show me that he's going to keep this one. And there's no teeth, right? So we're looking at not joining NATO now. Well, someone needs to make sure that Vladimir Putin doesn't come again. Vladimir Putin doesn't want to do business. When was the last time you picked up something on your desk and it said "Made in Russia"? Nothing. They don't make anything. They're a gas station with an army, and so. The idea that Steve Witkoff has that they're going to come and do business is at odds with decades of reality. And so, we need to wake up, and we need to recognize that Vladimir Putin's a bad guy. He just wants to roll through Europe and dominate as much of the world as he's possible. And he's working with China, and he's working with the Islamic extremist groups. And so they're all working together, and we're sort of thinking about what kind of business deals we can get after a peace agreement is signed. The world's not like that.
And Anna, as we start to finish up, your final thoughts on the film and what you'd like Americans to know that, as Stephen said, they're not hearing or learning about. Now that America, first of all, we are very grateful to America for facilitating the deal and helping us to bring peace closer. I grew up 30 miles from the Russian border, speaking Russian, so I'm the person whom Putin came to liberate. And here I am talking, telling stories of people whom he liberated. And now that we are talking about all the efforts that President Trump are making to bring this peace deal closer, out of 6 proposals that America made, we accepted 6. Putin accepted none. He says that he invaded Ukraine because he was afraid we will join NATO. If we say that if we promise not to join NATO, and if he doesn't withdraw troops, if he doesn't stop the war, it will mean the whole world should see that he doesn't want peace. He wants Soviet Union back. He wants to go further to Europe, and the world should be alerted.
Well, thank you both so much for your time today and all of your insights. Great to speak with you, Anna Shvetsova and Stephen Moore. Thank you so much.
Oh, super good to speak with you guys. Thanks so much.
For the opportunity.
And still to come, another surge of bitter Arctic air is sweeping across the country, bringing dangerous cold to more than 200 million Americans. That and more after this.
Next, are foreign entities controlling American corporations and pushing them away from shareholder returns towards so-called green initiatives, social justice, or even racial quotas? According to President Trump's new executive order, that is the case. He signed an order entitled Protecting American Investors from Foreign-Owned and Politically Motivated Proxy Advisors. Joining us for analysis is Will Hilt. He's Executive Director at Consumers Research. Will, thanks for joining us this morning. I think a bit of this executive order is not known knowledge to the common person. I personally had never heard of these two proxy advisors that President Trump singles out, which are the Institutional Shareholder Services, Inc. and Glass, Lewis & Co. So can you help explain who those entities are, what they do, and do they really wield power over American corporations?
Certainly, and I think it's a little bit more difficult for the average person to understand the ways in which these firms were exercising influence, because the other areas of the so-called ESG movement, the asset managers, the banks, the insurers, people have a reason to interact with them day to day. People know what getting insurance is like, what banking is like, and what having a 401k is like. But this is a service, this is an industry that really only exists to serve other very large businesses. So very quickly, when you are a large institutional investor, when you're a pension fund, when you are a 401k, when you are maybe a university endowment, you end up owning shares in thousands of companies because you have a very diversified portfolio. And each of those companies has a number of votes, mostly perfunctory, annually. The compensation packages of the executives have to be approved. The boards have to be reelected or not reelected if they're not doing a very good job. And those votes are kind of a pain to do the analysis for. And so an industry has risen up that takes the votes away from those institutional investors for a fee and votes them for those investors. They're required to do it as part of their fiduciary duty. And so these two companies basically take those votes and take care of that duty for those institutional investors so that they don't have to do it. The problem is this has become, first of all, there's really only two of them. They make up over 95% of the market, just those two firms. They're both foreign owned. ISS is owned by the German Stock Exchange, and Glass Lewis is owned by an offshoot of the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund. And they have extremely left-wing radical politics, especially over the last 10 to 15 years, and it shaded their votes. And this, just to give you an idea of the magnitude of how much they can sway, depending on the ownership structure of any given publicly traded company, just the advice of those two firms can move anywhere between 15 and 30% of the shares outstanding. So those two firms have a ton of say over who gets put on the boards of these corporations, what their executive compensation packages look like and are based on. And increasingly, what we see is not them doing their fiduciary duty by focusing on return for shareholder value in terms of their votes, but pushing a far left-wing agenda and controlled by foreign powers. So that's the thing that this EO is targeted at reducing.
Yeah, I mean, what you're sharing is really almost preposterous to think about, because we really live in a society that was designed to have checks and balances, whether it's government or with business and antitrust laws. I think what's really important are labels, right? Because the labels sound innocuous and positive, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion, or environmental, social, and governance. Those sound like something that everybody would support, and you could kind of go along with the idea that it would be good for business. But you're suggesting that these things maybe don't represent what those labels are, or are just outside of this term of fiduciary responsibility, which is that a business is, of course, intended to bring shareholder returns. So can you break down those two things, DEI and ESG, and how they sort of crept into these corporate mandates?
Yeah, absolutely. So ESG, as you noted, stands for environmental, social, governance. It's billed by its proponents as sort of just a different type of investment strategy. Like, Warren Buffett is famous for value investing, or there's momentum investing where you buy things that are going up, sell things as they start to go down. That is not what ESG actually operates as in the general market. What ESG is an excuse for large Wall Street firms, financial services companies specifically, to use their market share to push a far left progressive political agenda without ever having to meet the voters at a ballot box and get them to approve it. So for example, you have banks that use their loan portfolio, their access to financing, to require certain things of companies like net zero targets or DEI. You have insurers who said you can't get insurance for us for things like coal projects. Or if we do give you insurance, you're going to have to agree to certain things that have nothing to do with the operation or the safety of your business. And of course, you have the large asset managers like BlackRock, who are using other people's money, other, like I mentioned, institutional investors, state, local, federal pension funds, for example, to take the shares that they're given as stewards and to push a progressive a political agenda with those shares. So ESG is billed as an investment strategy. What it really is a strategy of political control using the choke point of financial services.
And Will, as we start to finish up, now that this problem has been identified in this executive order, are there any particular actions that the executive order lines out? Trump, of course, has worked to remove DEI from the military. What do you expect, considering that you identified it's a German and Canadian company that are exerting this outsized influence on American companies?
Great. Well, the big thing that this EO does is it directs some of the regulatory agencies that have coverage over these two firms, so specifically the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and the SEC, to basically look at their rules and say, one, do we even need proxy advisors? Could we, these are functions of the rules themselves. If you were to tweak some of the regulations, this industry would go away completely. So they're going to look at that. They're going to look at whether the fact that it's a duopoly is problematic, their foreign ownership is problematic, and whether the fact that you have so much power concentrated, so much voting power for these corporations concentrated in just these two firms triggers some of the disclosure mechanisms that the SEC has in place when you basically have what they call a hostile takeover. That's sort of colloquial nomenclature that it just means that somebody's trying to influence, has such a large power share over the corporation, they're in charge of it. And that triggers certain disclosures with the SEC. Up until now, proxy advisors' voting advice has not been covered by those regulations. This EO suggests that maybe they should.
Well, such an interesting topic, and certainly one that we want to keep abreast of as this continues to come to light and the remedies for it. Will Hild, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome back to NTD Good Morning. I'm Carrie Dunst. If you're just joining us now, here's some of today's top headlines. Police in Providence, Rhode Island have released a man who was held as a person of interest in the Brown University shooting. The attack left 2 students dead and 9 others are injured. Providence Mayor Brett Smiley says the investigation is moving in a different direction. The first victim has been identified as sophomore Ella Cook. President Trump paid his respects to the victims and wished the injured a speedy recovery. Investigators are investigating a shooting at Sydney's Bondi beach that killed 15 people during a Hanukkah celebration and injured many more. Police say 2 gunmen opened fire on a crowd of about 1,000 people. And an ISIS ambush in Syria killed 2 U.S. National Guard troops from Iowa and a U.S. civilian interpreter. An Iowa police chief identified his son, Nate Howard, as one of the 2 soldiers killed. Names of the other victims are expected to be released later today. The ISIS shooter was killed and 5 people suspected of having a connection to the gunman were arrested. President Trump is warning of, quote, very serious retaliation. Lawmakers are encouraging the continued cooperation to totally dismantle ISIS. And Ukraine's president says Kiev is willing to drop its bid to join NATO in exchange for Western security guarantees as a path toward ending the war with Russia. President Zelenskyy calls the move a compromise as U.S. and European partners prepare to continue ceasefire talks in Berlin under heightened security. Those are this morning's top headlines. With that, Steph, over to you.
Thank you, Carrie. Another surge of bitter Arctic air is sweeping across the country. It's bringing dangerous cold to more than 200 million Americans across dozens of states. Forecasters warn the Arctic blast will push into the northeast and southeast today, bringing life-threatening cold and the potential for frostbite and hypothermia. Temperatures across the northern tier plunged far below average this weekend, with readings nearing minus 30 degrees in parts of the upper Midwest. A major winter storm is also disrupting travel across the Northeast, causing widespread flight delays, cancellations, and power outages. Airports across the New York City region reported delays of several hours yesterday. Now to sports news. 3-time Super Bowl winning quarterback Patrick Mahomes has suffered a torn ACL in his left knee.
The injury happened during the KC Chiefs' loss to the Los Angeles Chargers yesterday.
The injury occurred with just under 2 minutes remaining in the 16-13 defeat. The loss eliminated Kansas City from the playoffs for the first time in Mahomes' career.
Mahomes was helped off the field by medical staff after being taken down from behind by Chargers' Deshaun Hand. Backup quarterback Gardner Minshew took over, but threw a late interception, sealing the Chargers' win.
An MRI confirmed the seriousness of the injury. Mahomes and the Chiefs are exploring surgical options.
Mahomes said the injury hurts, but vowed to come back even stronger. And shoppers in London are getting ready to stuff their stockings with unique Christmas gifts. We're going to take a closer look at some handcrafted items from artisans and entrepreneurs. Stay with us.
Welcome back. Thousands of runners around the world dressed up as Santa Claus over the weekend as they ran through the streets of cities like Mexico City, Paris, and Kosovo.
That's right. Runners in Kosovo joined the event to help raise funds for organizations supporting hospitalized children and families in need during the cold winter season.
It is an extraordinary event for the children and mothers in Kosovo and for families. Every year, children, parents, and businesses gather here with positive energy, and it is a wonderful sight to see.
I am extremely happy. Besides the fact that it is a very special event, it also has a humanitarian aspect in helping others. That is why I felt very good when I decided to come here.
After the race, runners received medals and celebrated at a Christmas market featuring music and dancing.
And over in Mexico City, residents transformed the streets in a festive spectacle as runners participated in the 7th annual Santa Run.
Thousands of participants dressed up in traditional Santa gear, creating a sea of red and white you see here.
And organizers divided the event into 3 distance categories to accommodate runners of all ages and abilities, with some runners even bringing their pets along for the run.
Well, and there you have it. Some awards were given out too. And you've got little gingerbread man on front. So
a
all the
gold medal
traditions
gingerbread
reinvented.
man. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I love those hats with the elf ears. They really kind of bring the whole thing together, don't they?
That's right, fleshing out the myths there. Well, we all know Santa Claus is real, but
well, sure. And what's amazing is how many helpers he has, because these runs are really popping up all over the world in every continent. We have.
Santa's got to keep busy around the year.
That's right.
Organizing these walks and runs. And,
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Santa's got a lot going on this time of year.
He does. Now, over in London, a market there features handcrafted items for shoppers looking for unique Christmas gifts.
That's right. Artisans and entrepreneurs offering products that can't be found anywhere else, particularly any big box store, to get these types of gifts. And NTD's Andrew Thomas has more on that.
This is the Salad Days market at London's Battersea Power Station. Sarah Brown is an artist, designer, and content creator. She's been busy this holiday season.
I've been making so many different things. So I've got a lot of hand-embellished decorations for the tree or for anywhere really. We've got some sequin ones, some paisleys that I've made that are laser cut out of acrylic, hand-painted vintage baubles, and just honestly everything I can make sparkly and beaded. Yeah, I've tried to make it.
Imogen Rhodes Davies is the founder of Imogen Melissa. She started her company in 2020.
So I've got all of the handmade decorations which are perfect for gifting, perfect for that person that you don't know what to buy for because they've got everything. You can always get them a decoration.
Rhodes Davies says she's proud that she's turned her hobby into a business.
So I took it full-time last year and it definitely took some time to get to that point because I think, yeah, getting that constant revenue stream coming in is quite difficult when you work for yourself. But I do lots of workshops which has really helped with that.
Visitor Gannett Randall says she appreciates individual handcrafted products. She also takes pride in spending locally.
I think supporting small businesses is really important. I mean, especially like in the economy, supporting a small business actually has great impact.
Olivia Odlum Tinker and her sister Daisy started Salad Days 6 years ago. The twin sisters have hosted more than 80 markets around London.
The biggest thing that has changed is our growth. So we started out, we didn't even have an Instagram account, we didn't have a website, we had nothing. Obviously now we're 6 years later, we have nearly 100,000 followers on Instagram, we have 20,000 followers on TikTok, 10,000 subscribers on our newsletter, so just our community has grown massively.
Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
What I love about this story is not only that they're bringing together all those artisans and giving them a platform by which they can reach potential customers, but it's a great model for anybody in another place who may want to do something more community-driven. You know, you can kind of look to a story like that. They started with nothing, she said, and just through surely bringing the community together, they were able to get this thriving business off the ground.
That's true, and not only the business, but all the connections. You can see it's a real community event. And from the markets that I've been to this year around New York City, many of those vendors come back year after year after year for sometimes decades. A couple of the markets have been open for decades at least. And they form a community amongst themselves, and they have such great stories to tell as well. So, you know, it all lives on in the grassroots, and it's very beautiful.
Yeah, especially when you can cut out the multiple levels of middlemen, middle peoples, and talk directly to the person who made or sourced, you know, from another country the product. It's certainly the money's going right where it belongs. So
that's it.
Well, we do have to wrap up our show now, but hey, if you got any feedback on the show, maybe there's a story you'd like to see Steph cover, send us an email at goodmorning@ntd.com. We would love to hear from you.
Yes, we'd love to hear all your ideas. And for round-the-clock original news coverage, be sure to watch us live at ntd.com/live, or you can always find us on our app. I'm Stephanie Cox.
I'm Carrie Dunst. Have a great day.